The space between human territory and Vexthar space had been quiet for 3 years. Nobody expected trouble there anymore. The two sides had agreed to keep the peace, and most ships passed through without problems. Lieutenant Katie Morrison served in the United Earth Medical Corps. She was 28 years old and had been a military medic for 6 years. Katie loved her job. She believed that helping people was the most important thing anyone could do, no matter where they came from or what species they belonged to. Her ship was called the Nightingale. It was a medical frigate, painted white with huge red crosses on every side. Everyone in space knew what those red crosses meant. They meant the ship carried doctors and nurses, not soldiers. They meant the ship was there to help, not to fight. Every civilized species in the galaxy had agreed never to attack medical ships. On that day, the Nightingale received a distress call. A civilian transport ship was stuck in an asteroid field. The ship had engine problems and could not escape. Worse, there had been an accident. Many people on board were hurt and needed medical help immediately. Katie and her team rushed to help. When they arrived, they found the transport ship badly damaged. Parts of it were on fire. The hull had cracks where asteroids had hit it. Inside, people were screaming and crying. The transport was carrying refugees. These were families running away from war zones in different parts of space. They were humans, yes, but also members of 6 other species. Some were Vexthar families who had left their own worlds because they did not want to fight in their government's wars anymore. Katie worked without stopping for 6 hours. She treated burns, fixed broken bones, and saved 3 people who would have died without her help. She moved from patient to patient, always calm, always smiling even though she was exhausted. Near the end of her shift, she met a young Vexthar boy. His name was Krenvik, and he was only 7 years old. He had a bad cut on his arm and was terrified. His parents had been taken to a different part of the ship for treatment, and he was alone. Katie knelt down beside him. She cleaned his wound gently and wrapped it with clean bandages. While she worked, she sang him a soft song from Earth. She did not speak his language perfectly, but she knew enough words to tell him not to be afraid. She told him his parents were safe and he would see them soon. Krenvik stopped crying. He looked up at Katie with big eyes and thanked her in his own language. Katie smiled and ruffled the scales on top of his head, the way a parent might ruffle a child's hair. That was when everything went wrong. A Vexthar warship appeared out of nowhere. It dropped out of hyperspace right next to the transport ship. The warship was called the Crimson Talon, and its captain was a man named Zeknor. Captain Zeknor was not a good man. He was a hardliner, someone who hated humans and believed his species should rule over all others. He had been hunting for Vexthar families who had run away from military service. When he saw the refugees on the transport, he became furious. His first officer, a younger Vexthar named Tolvar, tried to stop him. Tolvar pointed at the Nightingale. He showed Zeknor the red crosses painted on its hull. He reminded his captain about the galactic laws that protected medical personnel. Those red crosses meant the ship was off limits. Attacking it would be a war crime. Every species in the galaxy had signed treaties promising never to hurt doctors or nurses who were helping the wounded. It did not matter if those doctors were your enemies. It did not matter if they were helping people you wanted to capture. Medical personnel were always protected. Zeknor did not care. He was too angry to think clearly. He saw the human medics helping his people escape and he could not accept it. In his mind, the humans were stealing Vexthar citizens. He convinced himself that he had the right to stop them. He gave the order to fire. The weapons officer hesitated. He looked at Tolvar, hoping the first officer would countermand the order. But Zeknor shouted at him and the weapons officer obeyed. The Crimson Talon fired a plasma bolt directly at the transport ship. Katie saw the flash of light through the viewport. She had maybe 2 seconds to react. She did not think about herself. She did not try to run or hide. She threw her body over Krenvik, covering him completely. The plasma bolt tore through the transport's hull and exploded in the medical bay. The heat was unbelievable. Katie felt pain like nothing she had ever experienced. The tactical vest she wore was designed to protect against flying debris, not military weapons. It might as well have been made of paper. She collapsed on top of Krenvik. Blood poured from the wound in her abdomen. The boy beneath her was completely unhurt. Her body had taken all the damage. Katie's team ran to help her. They were all experienced medics trained to handle trauma, but they knew immediately that it was too late. The wound was too severe. Katie was bleeding internally and there was no way to stop it in time. Her best friend, Corporal Danny Wright, held her hand. He told her to stay calm, that help was coming, even though he knew it was not true. Katie looked up at him and tried to smile. She asked if the boy was okay. Danny pulled Krenvik out from under her. The boy was crying but uninjured. Not a single scratch on him. Katie had protected him perfectly. Katie nodded. Her voice was very quiet now. She told Danny to make sure the boy got back to his parents. She said not to let him be scared. Then she closed her eyes. Lieutenant Katie Morrison died 3 minutes after being shot. She was still holding Danny's hand. Her last act had been to save the life of a child whose people had killed her. The Crimson Talon jumped back into hyperspace immediately. Captain Zeknor did not wait to see the results of his attack. He assumed he had stopped the refugees and that nobody would care about one dead human medic. He could not have been more wrong. The Nightingale sent out an emergency signal. Within hours, every human ship in 3 sectors knew what had happened. The report included video footage from the transport security cameras. It showed Katie treating the boy. It showed her protecting him with her body. It showed her dying while Zeknor's ship fled like a coward. The footage reached Earth Command headquarters before the day was over. Admiral Gregory Stone watched it 3 times. He was a calm man, someone known for thinking carefully before making decisions. But as he watched Katie Morrison die on that screen, something inside him turned to ice. Stone called an emergency meeting. Representatives from 17 human worlds gathered within hours. They all watched the footage. They all saw the red crosses on the Nightingale. They all understood what had happened. This was not just murder. This was an attack on everything humanity stood for. Katie Morrison had represented the best of what humans could be. She had dedicated her life to helping others. She had died protecting a child of the very species that killed her. If humanity did nothing, if they accepted apologies and promises, they would be telling the galaxy that human lives meant nothing. They would be saying that the rules of war could be broken without consequences. The vote was unanimous and final. Humanity would respond. They would hunt down Captain Zeknor. They would make him answer for his crime. And they would make sure the entire galaxy understood that attacking human medical personnel would bring consequences beyond anything the attacker could imagine. 6 hours after Katie Morrison died, the order went out across the fleet. The Dreadnought Valiant was activated and sent to the neutral zone. Her mission was simple: find Zeknor and bring him to justice, whatever it took. The Dreadnought Valiant was the most powerful warship humanity had ever built. She was 3 kilometers long, covered in armor thick enough to withstand direct hits from weapons that could destroy cities. Her weapons could punch through shields protecting entire planets. She carried enough fighters and bombers to overwhelm any defense system in known space. But the Valiant was not just a weapon. She was a symbol. When humanity built her, they made a promise to the galaxy. The promise was simple: we will protect our own, and we will uphold the rules that keep civilization from falling into chaos. Captain Nathan Cross commanded the Valiant. He was 52 years old and had served in the human fleet for 30 years. He had fought in 3 wars and negotiated peace in a dozen more conflicts. People who knew him said he never made decisions based on emotion. He thought carefully about every action and considered every consequence. But when Admiral Stone gave him the mission briefing, Cross felt something he had not felt in years. It was not quite anger and not quite sadness. It was something colder and more focused. It was determination. Stone showed him the footage of Katie Morrison's death. Cross watched in silence. He saw the young medic singing to the frightened child. He saw her throw herself over the boy when the plasma bolt hit. He saw her die asking if the child was safe. Stone did not need to explain the mission. Cross understood immediately. This was not about revenge. This was about justice. This was about showing the galaxy that the rules meant something. If humans let this attack go unanswered, those red crosses would become meaningless. Medical personnel everywhere would become targets. Cross assembled his senior staff. His first officer was Commander Linda Harper. She was 39 years old and had earned her position through intelligence and skill, not politics. She had a reputation for speaking her mind, even when her opinions were unpopular. Harper looked at the mission parameters and made her position clear. They needed to find Zeknor and bring him to trial. They needed to do it in a way that showed humanity was interested in justice, not war. And they needed to make sure every species in the galaxy understood that attacking medical personnel would bring consequences that transcended politics. The intelligence officer was Lieutenant Commander Sophie Blake. She was 29 years old, the youngest senior officer on the ship. But her age did not matter. She had one of the sharpest minds in the fleet. Blake got to work immediately. She pulled every piece of data she could find about Captain Zeknor. She studied his service record, his past missions, his personal history. She built a psychological profile. What she found was not impressive. Zeknor was a bully and a coward. He had a pattern of attacking targets that could not fight back. He had never won a real battle against an equal opponent. He was good at making himself look tough by hurting the weak. After attacking the Nightingale, Zeknor had run straight back to Vexthar territory. He had docked at a military station deep inside his government's space. He probably thought he was safe there, surrounded by his own people and protected by their defenses. Blake recommended a bold approach. The Valiant should not wait for Zeknor to leave Vexthar space. They should go in and get him. Yes, it would be risky. Yes, it might start a war. But Blake believed the Vexthar government was more divided than most people realized. Cross listened carefully. He knew Blake was right about the risk. Sending a human dreadnought into Vexthar space could trigger a massive conflict. But he also knew she was right about the opportunity. If they waited too long, Zeknor might disappear. Worse, other species might start to think they could attack human medics without consequences. While Cross considered his options, something unexpected happened. Ambassador Claire Martinez contacted him from the human embassy on the Vexthar homeworld. Martinez was 61 years old and had been a diplomat for 40 years. She had negotiated treaties with 17 different species. She knew the Vexthar better than almost any human alive. And she had urgent news. The Vexthar government was in crisis. The attack on Katie Morrison had created an enormous political problem. The moderate faction, led by Prime Minister Kralvex, was furious. They had spent years trying to build better relationships with humanity. Zeknor's attack had destroyed that progress in seconds. The hardliners who supported Zeknor were also in trouble. Most Vexthar citizens did not approve of attacking medical personnel. It went against their own cultural values. Even many military officers thought Zeknor had gone too far. Martinez explained that Kralvex wanted to make a deal. If humanity would agree to handle this as a legal matter rather than a military invasion, Kralvex would help them capture Zeknor. The Vexthar government would provide his exact location. They would grant the Valiant safe passage through their territory. They would even disable the shields protecting the station where Zeknor was hiding. In exchange, Kralvex asked for one thing. He wanted humanity to make it absolutely clear to the galaxy that this was about justice, not war. He wanted a fair trial with neutral judges. He wanted the whole process to be public so everyone could see that both humans and Vexthar respected the law. Cross took the offer to Admiral Stone. They discussed it for 2 hours. Stone consulted with the civilian government. Everyone understood that this was a critical moment. If they accepted Kralvex's deal, they would get Zeknor quickly and peacefully. They would strengthen the moderates in the Vexthar government. They would show the galaxy that humanity preferred justice over revenge, and they would set a precedent for how to handle such crimes in the future. If they refused and invaded anyway, they would definitely get Zeknor, but they might also trigger a war that would cost millions of lives. They would destroy any chance of peace with the Vexthar, and they would look like aggressors rather than defenders of justice. Stone gave Cross full authority to make the final decision. He told Cross to do what he thought Katie Morrison would have wanted. Cross thought about that for a long time. He thought about a young woman who had spent 6 hours treating wounded refugees. He thought about someone who sang to a frightened child even though she was exhausted. He thought about a medic who gave her life to protect a boy whose people had killed her. Katie Morrison had believed in helping people, all people, no matter who they were. She had believed that every life had value. She had shown that belief with her actions, right up to her last breath. Cross accepted Kralvex's offer. The Valiant set course for Vexthar space. As the massive Dreadnought approached the border, Cross sent a message to his crew. He explained the mission and what it meant. They were not going to war. They were going to enforce the law. They were going to show the galaxy that civilization depended on rules, and that those rules would be defended. He also told them about Katie Morrison. He made sure every person on his ship knew her name and understood her sacrifice. She would be their inspiration and their guide. Everything they did from this point forward would honor her memory. The crew responded with determination. They manned their stations with unusual focus. They checked and rechecked their systems. They were ready for anything. The Valiant crossed into Vexthar space 3 days after Katie Morrison died. As promised, Vexthar patrol ships did not challenge them. Station commanders received orders to stand down. The massive human Dreadnought moved through alien territory like a ghost, silent and unstoppable. Ordinary Vexthar citizens watched from their planets and stations. They saw the huge warship pass by, its weapons powered but not aimed, its shields active but not aggressive. Many of them understood what was happening. The humans were coming for Zeknor, and their own government was helping them. It took 4 days to reach the military station where Zeknor had taken refuge. The station commander, a veteran officer named Talkesh, had received his orders from Kralvex personally. When the Valiant arrived, Talkesh lowered his shields as instructed. The Crimson Talon sat docked at the station, completely defenseless. Zeknor was in his quarters, probably thinking he was safe. He had no idea what was about to happen. Cross opened a channel to Talkesh. His message was simple and direct. Surrender Captain Zeknor and his senior officers within 1 hour, or the Valiant would destroy the entire station. Cross made it clear he was not bluffing. Talkesh did not hesitate. He sent security teams to arrest Zeknor immediately. The station commander had no loyalty to a criminal who had violated the most basic rules of war. 43 minutes later, Zeknor was in chains and being transferred to the Valiant. Captain Zeknor was brought aboard the Valiant in chains. His first officer Tolvar and his weapons officer came with him. The 3 Vexthar stood in the brig surrounded by human guards. They looked at the walls around them with expressions that mixed fear and defiance. Zeknor tried to maintain his dignity. He stood straight and refused to show fear, but his eyes told a different story. He had expected to be safe in Vexthar space. He had not imagined that his own government would hand him over to the humans. Captain Cross could have executed them immediately. His orders from Earth Command gave him that authority. After all, Zeknor had committed a clear war crime. The evidence was undeniable. Many people would have said that quick justice was appropriate. But Cross had made a promise to Prime Minister Kralvex. This would be justice, not revenge. There would be a proper trial with neutral judges. The entire galaxy would see that humans respected the law, even when dealing with someone who had murdered one of their own. The Galactic Court of Military Justice was convened on a neutral station. This court had been created 50 years earlier to handle war crimes and disputes between species. It consisted of judges from different species who had no stake in the conflicts they judged. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy. Representatives from 47 different species attended as observers. News agencies from hundreds of worlds sent reporters. Everyone wanted to see how this would be handled. The head judge was a Kalishi named Vormak. His species was known for their fairness and wisdom. Vormak had presided over 30 major trials in his career. He had a reputation for being completely impartial. He did not care about politics or popular opinion. He cared only about the law and the evidence. The prosecution was handled by a human lawyer named Colonel Patricia Webb. She was 60 years old and had been a military prosecutor for 3 decades. She had never lost a case when the evidence was clear, and she had never won a case by cheating or lying. Webb opened by presenting the facts. She showed sensor logs from the Nightingale that proved the medical frigate had been properly marked. The ship's transponder clearly identified it as a non-combatant medical vessel. Under galactic law, attacking such a ship was prohibited under all circumstances. Then she showed video footage from the transport ship. The courtroom fell silent as they watched Katie Morrison treating the young Vexthar boy. They saw her singing to him, bandaging his wounds, comforting him. They saw the moment when the Crimson Talon appeared. They saw Katie throw herself over the child to protect him. The footage showed everything. The plasma bolt hitting, Katie collapsing, her blood spreading across the floor. The boy beneath her crying but completely unharmed. Katie's last moments when she asked if the child was safe before she died. Webb let the video speak for itself. She did not add dramatic commentary. She did not need to. Everyone in the courtroom could see exactly what had happened. The defense lawyer was a Vexthar attorney named Mexol. He had been assigned to defend Zeknor, and he took his duty seriously even though he personally found his client's actions disgusting. A good legal system required good defense attorneys even for the guilty. Mexol tried to argue military necessity. He claimed that the refugees were strategic assets. He suggested that Zeknor had believed the medical ship was being used as cover for an illegal extraction operation. Judge Vormak interrupted him. The judge asked a simple question. Had the Nightingale been displaying proper medical markings? Mexol had to admit that yes, it had. Vormak then pointed out that under the Galactic Convention, medical vessels treating civilians in neutral space were protected regardless of who those civilians were or why they needed treatment. The law was clear. There were no exceptions for military necessity when it came to attacking marked medical personnel. That was the whole point of the Red Crosses. They meant that doctors and nurses were off limits always, no matter what. Then Webb called Tolvar to testify. The first officer of the Crimson Talon had been offered immunity in exchange for his honest testimony. Tolvar took the stand looking ashamed. He described what had happened on the bridge of the Crimson Talon. He admitted that he had warned Zeknor about the medical markings. He said that the weapons officer had also hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the order. He testified that Zeknor had seen the Red Crosses and understood what they meant, but had given the order to fire anyway. Tolvar's testimony was damning. It proved that Zeknor had not made a mistake. He had not acted in the heat of battle or under stress. He had deliberately ordered an attack on a medical vessel, knowing full well what he was doing. But the most powerful moment came when Webb called her final witness. She asked that Krenvik be allowed to testify, the 7-year-old Vexthar boy who Katie Morrison had died protecting. There was some debate about this. Some people thought it was inappropriate to make a child relive such a traumatic experience, but Krenvik's parents had agreed and the boy himself wanted to speak. Judge Vormak allowed it. Krenvik took the stand with his mother beside him for support. A translator helped him communicate, though he knew some common language words. Webb asked him gentle questions. Krenvik described meeting Katie. He said she had smiled at him and made him feel safe. She had sung to him while fixing his arm. She had told him stories about Earth while she worked. He said she was nice and made him laugh even though he had been scared. Then he described the attack. He said he saw a bright flash through the window. Before he could react, the human lady had covered him with her body. He felt her weight on top of him. He felt something warm and wet on his scales. He realized later it was her blood. Krenvik's voice got very quiet. He said that Katie had told him not to be afraid. Those were her last words to him. She was dying, bleeding, in terrible pain, but she used her final breath to comfort him. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Many of the observers were crying, including several Vexthar representatives. Even some of the judges looked emotional. Krenvik looked directly at Zeknor. The boy said that Katie had saved his life. She had protected him even though she was human and he was Vexthar. She had not cared that their species were enemies. She had just cared that he was hurt and scared and needed help. He asked Zeknor why he had killed her. What had she done wrong? She was just trying to help people. Why did that make her deserve to die? Zeknor had no answer. For the first time since his arrest, he looked down at the floor. He could not meet the boy's eyes. The defense had no more arguments. Mexol knew his case was hopeless. He made a brief closing statement asking for mercy, acknowledging that his client had committed a terrible crime, but suggesting that lifetime imprisonment was sufficient punishment. Webb's closing was simple. She said that Katie Morrison had represented everything good about civilization. She had dedicated her life to healing. She had treated everyone equally, regardless of species or politics. She had died protecting a child of the very species that murdered her. If the court let this crime go unpunished or treated it lightly, they would be saying that such dedication meant nothing. They would be telling every doctor and nurse in the galaxy that their lives were worthless. They would be destroying the rules that separated civilization from chaos. The judges deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, Judge Vormak read the verdict. His voice was firm and clear. Captain Zeknor was found guilty of war crimes. His first officer, Tolvar, was found guilty of being an accessory. The weapons officer was also found guilty. The sentence for Zeknor was life imprisonment without possibility of parole. His officers received 20 years each, but the verdict went further. Judge Vormak used his authority to issue a court opinion. He stated that this case demonstrated the need for stronger enforcement of medical protections. He called on all galactic governments to increase penalties for such crimes and to create better systems for protecting medical personnel in conflict zones. The trial was over. Justice had been served, but everyone knew this was just the beginning of something larger. The trial changed everything. Within a week, 17 different species had announced they wanted to strengthen the laws protecting medical personnel. Governments that had previously ignored such issues suddenly made it a priority. The Galactic Assembly called a special session. Delegates from across known space gathered to discuss new protections. The debate was surprisingly brief. Almost everyone agreed that something needed to change. A human delegate named Senator Helen Baker led the drafting committee. She worked with representatives from 12 other species to create a comprehensive new treaty. They called it the Morrison Accords, named for the woman whose death had made it necessary. The Morrison Accords went much further than previous laws. They did not just say that attacking medical personnel was illegal. They created enforcement mechanisms. Any species that violated the accords would face immediate economic sanctions. Military forces that attacked medical vessels would be subject to prosecution by an international court. Leaders who ordered such attacks could be personally held responsible. The accords also created a new organization. The Medical Protection Fleet would be a multinational force dedicated to defending doctors and nurses in conflict zones. Ships from different species would serve together, protecting medical vessels regardless of whose flag they flew. Captain Cross was asked to command the first squadron of this new fleet. The Valiant would be its flagship. Cross accepted immediately. It seemed like the perfect way to honor Katie Morrison's memory. But the changes went beyond laws and treaties. Katie's story had touched something deep in the galactic consciousness. People from dozens of species began talking about what she represented. She became a symbol, not just of humanity, but of the ideals that all civilized beings claimed to believe in. Medical schools across the galaxy started teaching about her. Students learned about the young human who had given her life to protect a child of a species that was supposed to be her enemy. They discussed what that meant and what it required of them as future doctors. Katie's hometown on Earth built a memorial. It was simple and beautiful. A statue showed a medic kneeling beside a child, her hand reaching out in comfort. The base of the statue was inscribed with her last words, "Tell him not to be afraid." The dedication ceremony was attended by thousands. Ambassador Martinez came from the Vexthar homeworld. Prime Minister Kralvex himself attended, the first Vexthar leader to visit Earth in 20 years. He laid a wreath at the statue and gave a speech about the debt his species owed to Katie Morrison. But the most moving moment came when Krenvik and his family arrived. The young Vexthar boy walked up to the statue and stood looking at it for a long time. His mother stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Krenvik placed a small bundle of flowers at the base of the statue. They were flowers from his homeworld, specially brought to Earth for this occasion. He spoke in halting English, words he had been practicing for weeks. He said that Katie had saved his life. He would never forget her. He promised that he would try to be like her, to help people and be kind no matter who they were. It was the only way he could thank her. There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Admiral Stone gave the main speech. He talked about humanity's journey to the stars. He said that humans had made many mistakes along the way. They had fought wars, made bad decisions, hurt people they should have helped. But they had also learned and grown. Katie Morrison, Stone said, represented the best of what humanity could be. She had chosen to serve as a medic because she believed every life had value. She had treated everyone equally. She had shown courage and compassion even in her final moments. Her death had brought humanity to the edge of war. The fleet could have invaded Vexthar space. They could have destroyed military bases and killed thousands. Many people had wanted exactly that kind of revenge, but humanity had chosen a different path. They had pursued justice instead of vengeance. They had worked with moderate Vexthar leaders to capture the criminal. They had insisted on a fair trial with neutral judges. They had turned a tragedy into an opportunity to strengthen the rules that protected everyone. Stone believed that was what Katie would have wanted. She had spent her life healing. She would not have wanted her death to cause more violence and suffering. She would have wanted it to mean something positive, something that would help protect other medical personnel in the future. The changes continued to spread. The Vexthar government completed its transformation. Prime Minister Kralvex used the political capital he had gained to purge the hardliners from positions of power. Within 6 months, the entire military leadership had changed. Officers who believed in cooperation replaced those who believed in conquest. Relations between humans and Vexthar improved dramatically. Trade increased. Cultural exchanges began. Students from both species started studying at each other's universities. 2 years after Katie's death, the governments signed a mutual defense treaty. Former enemies became allies. The medical protection fleet proved to be remarkably successful. Ships from 8 different species served together. They protected medical vessels in 3 different war zones. Not a single medical ship was attacked in the first 2 years of operation. The fleet's existence was enough to deter would-be attackers. Captain Cross commanded the fleet for 3 years before retiring. He had seen his mission through. The Valiant had become a symbol of something more than military might. She represented the idea that strength should be used to protect the innocent, not to dominate the weak. On his last day of command, Cross stood on the bridge of the Valiant and thought about Katie Morrison. He had never met her. She had died before he even received his orders, but he felt like he knew her somehow. Her values had guided every decision he made. Commander Harper asked him what he was thinking about. Cross smiled and told her about a young medic who had sung to a frightened child. He said that everything they had accomplished, all the laws they had changed and the lives they had saved, started with one person who had chosen to do the right thing even when it cost her everything. The Valiant continued in service after Cross retired. New captains commanded her, but her mission remained the same. She was always there when medical personnel needed protection. She was a promise made real, that humanity would defend those who dedicated their lives to healing. Katie Morrison's parents received a visit from Krenvik's family 5 years after her death. The Vexthar family traveled to Earth specifically to meet them. It was an emotional meeting. Krenvik, now 12 years old, told Katie's parents how their daughter had saved his life. He showed them a photograph he always carried. It was the last picture taken of Katie, showing her smiling while treating patients on the transport ship. Krenvik said he looked at it every day. It reminded him to be brave and kind. Katie's mother hugged the young Vexthar. She told him that her daughter would be happy to know he had survived and was growing up well. She said Katie had always believed that helping others was the most important thing anyone could do. Krenvik made a promise that day. He told Katie's parents that he wanted to become a doctor. He wanted to help people the way Katie had helped him. He would study human medicine and Vexthar medicine both. He would dedicate his life to healing in honor of the woman who had given her life for him. Katie's parents gave their blessing. They told him that would make their daughter proud. As the Vexthar family prepared to leave, Katie's father gave Krenvik a gift. It was Katie's medical badge, the one she had worn on every mission. Krenvik accepted it with trembling hands. He promised to wear it when he became a doctor. He would carry it as a reminder of what medicine should mean: compassion without boundaries, healing without hatred, courage without hesitation. The legacy of Katie Morrison continued to grow. Her name became synonymous with the best values of the medical profession. When young people across the galaxy chose to become doctors or nurses, many of them cited her as their inspiration. 10 years after Katie Morrison's death, humanity was very different. The species that had once been struggling to find its place in galactic society was now respected as a leader. Not because of military power, though humanity certainly had that, but because of the principles they had demonstrated. The Morrison Accords had been signed by 63 species. Medical personnel operating under those accords had treated millions of patients in conflict zones across the galaxy. Not a single marked medical vessel had been attacked since the accords went into effect. The Red Cross had become truly sacred again. Krenvik graduated from medical school at the top of his class. He had studied for 8 years, learning both Vexithar and human medical techniques. His specialty was trauma surgery, the same field Katie had worked in. He wore her medical badge every day just as he had promised. His first assignment was with the Medical Protection Fleet. He served aboard a hospital ship that traveled to war zones, treating casualties from all sides of various conflicts. It was dangerous work, but Krenvik never hesitated. One day his ship responded to a distress call from a colony caught in a civil war. Rebels and government forces had been fighting for months. Civilians were trapped in the middle, dying from wounds that could have been easily treated if they could reach medical care. Krenvik and his team set up a field hospital in a ruined school building. They treated everyone who came to them, never asking which side they fought for. Soldiers from both armies came through their doors, and the medical team treated them all the same. On the third day, a young human girl was brought in. She had been caught in an explosion and had severe burns. Krenvik worked on her for 6 hours. He used every technique he knew, combining Vexthar and human medical knowledge to save her life. While he worked, he sang to her. It was the same song Katie Morrison had sung to him 20 years earlier. He had learned it from a recording, practiced until he could sing it perfectly in English. The little girl did not understand the words, but the gentle melody helped calm her. She survived. When her parents came to thank him, Krenvik told them about Katie. He explained how a human medic had saved his life when he was about the same age as their daughter. He said he was just passing along the gift Katie had given him. The parents were moved by the story. The father asked if they could name their daughter Katie, as a second name to honor the human who had inspired the doctor who saved her. Krenvik said that would be wonderful. That night he wrote a letter to Katie's parents telling them about it. Katie Morrison's legacy continued to spread in unexpected ways. A human filmmaker made a documentary about her life. The film was released in theaters across dozens of worlds. It told her story simply and honestly, without drama or exaggeration. The documentary showed her childhood, her decision to become a medic, her years of service. It showed her treating patients of many different species. It ended with the footage of her death, the same footage that had been shown at the trial. The film won awards on 17 different worlds. But more importantly, it inspired a new generation. Applications to medical schools increased by 40% in the year after it was released. Young people from dozens of species wanted to follow Katie's example. Humanity's diplomatic standing continued to grow. When disputes arose between species, they often asked humans to mediate. Earth's diplomats had a reputation for fairness and wisdom. They had proven they could be trusted to put principles above politics. Ambassador Martinez retired after 25 years of service. At her retirement ceremony, Prime Minister Kralvex attended and gave a speech. He said that Martinez had helped transform the relationship between humans and Vexthar. But he noted that it all started with Katie Morrison. Katie's sacrifice had created an opportunity. It could have led to war and destruction. Instead, wise leaders on both sides had chosen a better path. They had pursued justice and created lasting change. Kralvex said that was the real lesson. That tragedy could become an opportunity if people had the courage to choose the difficult right over the easy wrong. The Valiant remained in service, now commanded by Captain Rebecca Price. Price had served under Nathan Cross for 5 years before taking command. She understood the ship's special role. The Valiant was not just a warship. It was a symbol and a promise. Price maintained the tradition Cross had started. Every new crew member learned Katie Morrison's story on their first day aboard. They were told that their job was not to start wars but to prevent them. They were there to protect those who could not protect themselves. The ship's medical bay was named the Morrison Medical Center. A portrait of Katie hung on the wall. Every patient who passed through those doors saw her face and heard her story from the medical staff. 15 years after Katie's death, humanity made first contact with a new species called the Zenth. The Zenth were aggressive and territorial. Initial meetings did not go well. There were several skirmishes and tensions were high. Then a Zenth colony was struck by a natural disaster. A massive earthquake devastated their largest city. Thousands were trapped in collapsed buildings. Their own rescue teams were overwhelmed. The human fleet was nearby. Admiral Stone's successor, Admiral Victoria Hayes, made an immediate decision. She sent 3 hospital ships to help along with engineering teams and supplies. The Valiant led the relief effort. The Zenth government was suspicious at first. They wondered if this was some kind of trick. But Captain Price made it clear that humans were there to help, nothing more. She invoked the Morrison Accords and displayed the red crosses prominently on all vessels. The human teams worked alongside Zenth rescue workers for 3 weeks. They pulled survivors from rubble. They treated injuries. They provided food and shelter. They asked for nothing in return. One of the medical teams was led by Krenvik, who was now a senior surgeon. He worked 20-hour days, treating Zenth patients with the same care he gave everyone. When Zenth doctors asked him why humans were helping a species they had been fighting with, he told them about Katie Morrison. He explained that humans believed certain things were more important than politics or conflict. Helping the sick and injured was one of those things. It did not matter if the Zenth and humans were enemies. People were suffering and doctors had a duty to help. The Zenth were deeply affected by this. Their culture valued strength and honor above all else. They had assumed humans would use the disaster as an opportunity to gain advantage. Instead, humans had simply helped. The Zenth leader, a warrior named Kreth, met with Admiral Hayes after the rescue operations ended. He thanked her for the assistance. Then he asked about the human medic whose story Krenvik had been telling everyone. Hayes showed him the documentary about Katie Morrison. Kreth watched it in silence. When it ended, he sat for a long time without speaking. Finally, he said that his species had been wrong about humans. The Zenth had thought humans were weak because they valued compassion. They had assumed that kindness was a form of cowardice. But Kreth now understood that it took more courage to help than to hurt. It was easy to destroy. It was hard to heal. Within a year, the Zenth and humans had signed a peace treaty. The Zenth joined the Morrison Accords. They contributed ships to the medical protection fleet. Former enemies became allies, all because humans had chosen to help when they could have chosen to exploit. Katie Morrison's parents lived to see all of this. They watched as their daughter's memory inspired changes across the galaxy. They met dozens of people whose lives had been touched by her story. They saw how one person's choice to do good could ripple outward, affecting millions. On the 20th anniversary of Katie's death, a major ceremony was held at the memorial on Earth. Representatives from over 100 species attended. The crowd was so large that most people had to watch on screens outside the memorial grounds. Krenvik gave the main speech. He was now 47 years old, a renowned surgeon who had saved thousands of lives. He stood before the statue of Katie, the same statue where he had placed flowers as a child, and told her story one more time. He spoke about a young human woman who had believed that every life had value, who had treated everyone with kindness regardless of who they were, who had died protecting a child of a species that was supposed to be her enemy. He said that Katie Morrison had changed the galaxy not through conquest or power, but through a simple choice to do what was right. She had shown everyone what true courage looked like, and her example continued to inspire new generations to choose compassion over hatred, healing over harm. Krenvik ended his speech with the words Katie had spoken to him with her dying breath. He said them in English, his voice strong and clear. Tell him not to be afraid. Those words, he said, were Katie's last gift to him. They were a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people who would protect you, care for you, comfort you. That was what civilization meant. That was what humanity represented. The crowd stood in silence for several minutes after he finished. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. The applause grew and grew until it echoed across the memorial grounds. It was not just for Krenvik. It was for Katie. It was for everything she represented and everything her legacy had achieved. 25 years after Katie Morrison's death, humanity had become one of the most respected species in the galaxy, not because they had the biggest fleet, though their military was certainly powerful, not because they controlled the most resources or had the most colonies, but because they had proven, again and again, that they could be trusted to do the right thing. The Morrison Accords were now considered the foundation of galactic medical law. Over 90 species had signed them. Medical personnel working under the Accords had saved millions of lives. The Red Cross was recognized and respected from one end of known space to the other. The medical protection fleet had grown to include ships from 23 different species. They operated in every major conflict zone, ensuring that doctors and nurses could work without fear. Not a single medical vessel flying under their protection had been attacked in 25 years. Krenvik was now one of the most famous doctors in the galaxy. He had saved thousands of lives and trained hundreds of other doctors, but he never forgot where it all started. He carried Katie's medical badge every single day. He told her story to every student he taught. When Krenvik's first daughter was born, he named her Katie just as he had promised. She grew up hearing stories about the human woman her father had never forgotten. When she was old enough to understand, Krenvik took her to Earth to visit the memorial. Young Katie stood before the statue, looking up at the image of the medic kneeling beside a child. Krenvik told his daughter that this statue showed the moment when his life was saved. He explained how the human Katie had protected him, even though it cost her everything. His daughter asked why the human had done it. Why had she saved a Vexthar child when the Vexthar had killed her? Krenvik smiled and told her the answer was simple. Because it was right. Because every life had value. Because being a doctor meant helping everyone who needed help. Young Katie thought about this for a long time. Then she said she wanted to be a doctor too, just like her father and just like the human Katie. She wanted to help people. Krenvik hugged her and said that would make both Katies proud. The impact of Katie Morrison's legacy continued to grow in unexpected ways. Medical schools across the galaxy had adopted her story as a core part of their ethics curriculum. Every medical student learned about her. They discussed what her actions meant and what responsibilities came with being a healer. A famous Vexthar philosopher wrote a book about Katie Morrison. The book was called The Cost of Compassion. It explored how one person's sacrifice had changed an entire civilization's understanding of what it meant to be civilized. The philosopher argued that Katie's death had forced the galaxy to confront an uncomfortable truth. Everyone claimed to value medical personnel. Everyone signed treaties protecting doctors and nurses. But until Katie's death, those protections had been just words on paper. What made Katie's story special was not just her sacrifice. It was humanity's response. They could have used her death as an excuse for war. They could have invaded Vexthar space and destroyed everything in their path. Many species would have done exactly that. Instead, humans had pursued justice. They had worked with moderate Vexthar leaders. They had insisted on a fair trial. They had turned tragedy into an opportunity to strengthen the laws that protected everyone. That, the philosopher said, was what separated true civilization from barbarism dressed up in fancy words. The book became required reading in diplomatic academies across dozens of worlds. Young diplomats studied it to understand how to handle crises without resorting to violence. It became a model for conflict resolution. Meanwhile, the relationship between humans and Vexthar continued to deepen. The two species that had once been bitter enemies were now close allies. They fought together in joint military operations. They traded extensively. Their cultures began to blend in interesting ways. Young humans learned Vexthar language in school. Young Vexthar studied human history and culture. Mixed crews served together on ships throughout both territories. Friendships formed that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Prime Minister Kralvex, now very old, gave an interview on the 25th anniversary of Katie Morrison's death. He reflected on how that one terrible moment had changed everything. Kralvex said that Zeknor's crime could have destroyed any chance of peace between their species. Instead, wise leaders on both sides had found a way to turn it into a foundation for lasting friendship. He credited Katie Morrison for making that possible. Her sacrifice had shown both species what they could be at their best. Humans had shown restraint and wisdom. Vexthar moderates had found the courage to hold their own people accountable. Together, they had built something beautiful out of something horrible. The Valiant remained in service, now commanded by Captain Stephen Park. Park had grown up hearing stories about Katie Morrison. She had been his hero since childhood. When he was given command of the famous Dreadnought, he felt the weight of responsibility. Park maintained all the traditions that had been established. Every new crew member learned Katie's story. The medical bay still bore her name. Her portrait still hung on the wall. And the ship's mission remained the same: protect those who could not protect themselves. Under Park's command, the Valiant responded to its most challenging mission yet. A new species called the Drask had entered known space. They were aggressive and believed that might made right. They attacked everything they encountered, including medical vessels. The Drask attacked a hospital ship in neutral territory. The ship was treating refugees from a conflict the Drask had started. The attack killed 15 medical personnel from 4 different species. It was the first such attack in over 20 years. The galaxy was outraged. The Morrison Accords had worked so well for so long that many younger beings had never known a time when medical personnel were not safe. This attack was a brutal reminder that civilization required constant defense. The Valiant led a multinational fleet to confront the Drask. Ships from 8 different species joined the mission. They were united by a common purpose: enforce the laws that protected medical personnel no matter what it took. Captain Park made contact with the Drask leadership. He explained the Morrison Accords and the consequences for violating them. He told them about Katie Morrison and what her death had meant to the galaxy. He gave them one chance to surrender the officers responsible for the attack. The Drask leader laughed at him. He said the Drask were warriors. They did not follow rules made by weak species who valued healers over fighters. He said they would attack whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Park's response was measured but final. He explained that the fleet surrounding Drask space included the most powerful warships of 8 species. The Drask could either hand over the criminals and agree to respect medical neutrality, or their civilization would be reduced to dust. The Drask leader thought this was a bluff. He had never encountered a situation where multiple species would unite over something as trivial as dead doctors. He ordered his fleet to attack the multinational force. It was over in 6 hours. The Drask fleet was crushed. Their military installations were destroyed. Their leader was captured and brought to trial. The entire galaxy watched as the court handed down the harshest sentence possible: life imprisonment and permanent expulsion of the Drask from all civilized space until they agreed to respect medical neutrality. The message was clear. The rules mattered. Medical personnel were off limits. Anyone who violated that principle would face overwhelming consequences. The galaxy had been reminded why those red crosses were sacred. After the battle, Captain Park visited the memorial on Earth. He stood before the statue of Katie Morrison and thought about everything that had changed because of her. 25 years ago, she had been one young medic trying to help refugees. Now her memory united dozens of species in defense of shared principles. Park placed flowers at the base of the statue, a tradition that many visitors followed. He silently thanked Katie for her sacrifice and promised that the Valiant would continue to honor her memory by protecting those who dedicated their lives to healing. As he left the memorial, Park thought about the future. New species would continue to enter known space. Some would be peaceful, others aggressive. There would always be those who saw compassion as weakness, who thought rules were meant to be broken. But there would also always be people like Katie Morrison. People who believed that every life had value. People who chose to heal rather than harm. People who would sacrifice everything to protect the innocent. And as long as there were people like Katie, there would be people like the crews of the Valiant and the Medical Protection Fleet. People willing to defend those principles with everything they had. People who understood that civilization was not something that just existed. It was something you had to build and defend every single day. Katie Morrison had been gone for 25 years, but her presence was felt throughout the galaxy. Medical students invoked her name. Diplomats studied her story. Warriors defended the principles she had died for. Parents told their children about her so they would understand what it meant to be truly brave. She had been one person, living for just 28 years. But her impact would echo for centuries. She had changed the galaxy not through power or conquest,